Well, Margaritis, I'd like to have a question on Poland and the process in Poland concerning the legal status of what's going on at the moment. There was some confusion yesterday with what Vice President Timmermans has said, because he was always jumping between assessment process and fact-finding and dialogue and so on. And apart from that, there are commissioners who told us that yesterday there has been no vote. So my question is, if I understand that right, the mechanism, as you have sent out yesterday in the Q&A, is that first of all there's a fact-finding, then an assessment, then the Commission has to decide on a dialogue with the country. If everything fails, then there will be a reasoned opinion, and then a recommendation, and then and after all that fails, there will be an Article 7 process. So my question is very clear. So are we already in a dialogue, or structural dialogue, as you have sent out yesterday? That would mean that the Commission will not take any further decision in March, because the process has been started. But that would mean if the Polish government would not react, the Commission could not stop it. They would have to continue the whole process until the Article 7 process. Is that a right interpretation or not? Could you please clarify all this?
Let me first congratulate you on the time that you invested in going through the rule of law framework. I think that one of the reasons that we circulated yesterday this extensive Q&A is to allow you to have a clear understanding, as you clearly seem to have done, of what this framework provides for. This is a framework that was given to the Commission, I remind you, in March 2014, 2 years ago. So indeed, what I think Vice President Timmermans explained standing from this same lectern yesterday to you in clarity was that he was empowered by the college to engage in a structured and cooperative dialogue with Poland that would allow him to clarify certain issues that have not been addressed by the two letters he received. And he was very clear. He said that the college gave a rendezvous meeting for mid-March that would allow for this structured and cooperative dialogue to conclude, that would also allow for the Venice Commission to deliberate. I remind you that it's the Polish authorities that address themselves to the Venice Commission. So overall, and contrary to what certain observers like to do, or to use as arguments to create confusion, I don't think there was any confusion. I think the college held a very clear orientation debate that led to this empowerment to Franz Timmermans to engage in this structured and cooperative dialogue. He was also very, as he is very clear always, he said that he's very open on all forms of this dialogue. He said that he's ready to receive letters, he's ready to go to Warsaw, he's ready to welcome his Polish counterparts here. So indeed, the two terms that we would like to discuss, would like you to retain from this process, is the structured and the cooperative nature of the process in which we find ourselves. Of course, overall, within the overall framework of rule of law framework, which is an obligation for the Commission, because the Commission is obliged to address these issues within this context. Follow-up.
But if I may follow up, the key question is, in March, when President Timmermans will present his report, and if he says, well, I'm of the opinion that it's not sufficient what the Polish government has done until now, will that mean that then automatically the next step of the process will go forth, or will it be an obligation to have a new decision by the Commission? That's a key question I've posed.
You are an experienced correspondent in this room, and you know that we never engage in what-if questions. We will not do that today either. I prefer to stay where I am now, where the college actually is, at the beginning of this structured dialogue, and the Commission hopes, or I think yesterday Franz Timmermans more than hoped, he was rather confident that this process by mid-March will lead to the sort of outcome that would allow the Commission to assess the situation. So all the other, I will not speculate now with what if then, what if that. But we have a very clear horizon now, and we have, I think, full clarity to work meaningfully, cooperatively, without undue dramatization around these issues. Jurek.
Deux questions. Une question.
A couple of questions. A technical or legal question, which is quite simple. The mechanism in question is legally, or can you tell me what the legal basis is in the treaty? I think in 2014, when the Commission adopted this framework, the Council Legal Service, I think, expressed doubts as to its legal basis and what the legal basis of this procedure actually was. Secondly, the Belgian Foreign Minister, Anders, yesterday publicly stated the idea that he wants to put forward to the Council, the General Affairs Council. The Council should have a peer review about twice a year of fundamental freedoms and values. So every half year, half the member states would be subject to a peer review. So this would establish a type of systematic procedure, and it would be less controversial. So everyone would be reviewing everyone. Do you have a view on that? Perhaps I can attempt an answer. You have Article 7 in the treaty, which was added into the treaty, and it's primary law. There aren't 1,000 different ways of interpreting this. Now, as you know, until March 2014, the Commission did have to respect the rule of law in Europe, but there was no systematic framework in place for Article 7 procedures if needed. So there was no systematic framework in place to make sure these matters were dealt with in an ordered way. Now, in March 2014, we agreed on a framework which now allows the Commission to approach these matters in a more systematic fashion. Prior to March 2014, this was all dealt with in an ad hoc fashion. For example, there were some issues about the rule of law in Romania, and at that time, this was dealt with in a different matter. There were some issues relating to Hungary as well, and the Commission there drew on legal opinions. But now we have this framework, which is established, follows a particular system, and I'd prefer not to say more than that. I know that there are different legal interpretations pertaining to certain legal details, but I don't think lawyers need a spokesperson up here explaining all those different nuances. And this issue of statements being made by various individuals suggesting other methods or other instruments, alternatives. Well, the idea of the college is to stick with the established, clear, simple framework. And this framework will allow us to do what we have to do without dramatizing matters and without causing difficulty. So we work together in a cooperative fashion without creating any unnecessary difficulty.
Is there anything on Poland? Yes, David. Poland? No? Poland? Yes, yes, please.
The Polish Prime Minister will go to Strasbourg next week to attend the European Parliament debate on Poland. Do you think that Mr. Juncker or Timmermans can use this opportunity and meet her and speak to her directly about these rule of law issues?
As you know, President Juncker already met the Polish Prime Minister in Paris and the sidelines of COP21. They agreed that President Juncker will visit Warsaw and he will be delighted to do so. Our Energy Commissioner, Miguel Arias Cañete, is on his way to Warsaw as we speak. As with all member states, the Commission will have a full, systematic, fluid, open, cordial, choose the adverb you want, cooperation with the Polish authorities. Yes, please.
Margaritis, tu as évoqué le CVM.
You were talking about the CBM. My question is, how did these two mechanisms exist in the case of Bulgaria and Romania, the CBM and the other mechanism which is being applied in the case of Poland? Yes, well, I did refer to that, answering, I think, Jurek's question, because he was saying that there was a time at which those issues had to be addressed in other countries, and the sort of type of questions we were looking at in terms of the rule of law was the same. And we're going to continue doing this, using the insofar as that particular mechanism continued to exist. I was just using that as an example of how in the Commission we can use our discretion to evaluate the situation vis-a-vis the rule of law in Europe, taking on board all available tools. And as I said, that now we have this framework, a new framework, and it's up to us to work within it.
Polish file for today. Let's move on. Let's start with David.